May I approach, Your Honor?
Mr. Ferguson was found guilty by a jury assembled from this community with his participation of 4 counts. That was manslaughter by culpable negligence of Trinidad Hernandez. She was a grandmother at 50, of Miley Cruz, an infant at 1, Marvin Cruz, a child of 9, and Aniari Hernandez Morcillo, a child of 11. The jury was instructed through the jury instructions and the Florida statutes that culpable negligence means gross negligence, flagrant negligence, showing a reckless disregard for human life, a disregard for the safety of other people, or a conscious indifference to the consequences of the decisions that they make. With those definitions, they found that the duty of care to other human beings on planet Earth had been violated to that enhanced and flagrant standard. The defense has presented the court with 2 requests to consider for downward departure and has accurately recited in their motion that that is a 2-part consideration. Number 1, whether the record evidence supports that the court could depart for a valid legal assertion, and number 2, whether examining the circumstances of the case and the mitigators and aggravators of the case, whether it should depart. First basis that is requested by the defense is that the crime was committed in an unsophisticated, isolated manner, and that the defendant has shown remorse. I understand the limitations of speaking when one is accused of a criminal offense. That lack of remorse cannot be considered for sentencing purposes absent a request for downward departure. The court for the first time today has heard Mr. Ferguson express any remorse. It appears to the court that he is remorseful, obviously, of the situation that he finds himself in and for the pain and deaths of the family. The court for the first time has heard any acceptance of responsibility for any of Mr. Ferguson's actions today. The court is hard-pressed to find that what has been asserted by family members and Mr. Ferguson is competent and substantial evidence to support the statutory considerations of downward departure. But based on what's been presented, I do find that it meets that standard. As to the second request for downward departure, specialized treatment for a mental disorder or a physical ailment that is unrelated to substance misuse and amenable to treatment, the court finds the record evidence is insufficient to support competent substantial evidence to support that as a consideration for downward departure. Court's had an opportunity, as we all have, to understand the obvious nature of this tragedy. It is self-evident. I've heard from Mr. Hernandez, the husband of Trinidad and grandfather to Miley, Marvin, and Aniari, and I have tried to listen carefully and really listen to what you had to tell the court and the family, as well as Anissa Hernandez, the aunt of the children and daughter of Trinidad, and most heartbreakingly, Sabrina Hernandez, the daughter of Trinidad and the mother of Miley, Martin, and Annie Yari. Your anger is understood. I think it is genuine. That will be a journey, a lifelong journey that you and your family have to carry. I wish you the Lord's wisdom and guidance in that path. We've also had an opportunity to hear from Mr. Ferguson's family. As heard from Diamond Ferguson, his daughter, Naria Ballard, from Mr. Floyd, all of which considered them to be sons and daughters of Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson was described as loving, compassionate, a provider, helpful, generous, encouraging, present, loved by many, surrounded by family and friends who are here in the courtroom and offering full support. It was also discussed of the very important, and this came from both sides, accountability and responsibility. So how do we find ourselves here at the moment of sentencing? We find ourselves here because a jury determined that Mr. Ferguson's negligence was criminal, that it was gross, that it was flagrant, that it was in reckless disregard for human life, disregarded the safety of other people here on planet Earth, and that was evidence of indifference to the consequences of that decision. The score sheet indicates several sentencing options for the court. Based on a basis that there is competent and substantial evidence to consider a downward departure, could downward depart. The statutory lowest permissible prison sentence indicates a lowest permissible prison sentence of 444.15 months in the Department of Corrections, which by my math is just over 37 years. Mr. Ferguson will be 70 this September. That becomes the required sentence should the court impose sentence and find that a downward departure is not appropriate for each of the 4 counts, or a final request from the state is that because the point value exceeds a certain value, that he could legally be sentenced to life in prison for these allegations. I have listened to each of the family members. Mr. Ferguson, I have listened, really listened to your statement. I've listened to the surviving family members. The court declines to exercise its discretion to downward depart based on this being an unsophisticated, isolated, and that the defendant has shown remorse. I do so based on a totality of the circumstances, my involvement in the trial, my observations of Mr. Ferguson's testimony, and the record evidence that was presented. With that being said, the court's sentencing options are now limited to life in prison or 444.15 months in the Department of Corrections. The court is going to elect to impose a Department of Corrections sentence. Mr. Ferguson, you will be adjudicated guilty of manslaughter, culpable negligence for the death of Trinidad Hernandez. You'll be adjudicated guilty for manslaughter by culpable negligence for the death of Miley Cruz. You'll be adjudicated guilty of manslaughter by culpable negligence for the death of Marvin Cruz. You'll be adjudicated guilty of manslaughter by culpable negligence for the death of Eniari Hernandez Marcilio. As to each count concurrently, you are sentenced to 444 months, 444 months and 0.15 months in the Department of Corrections. That equates to just over 37 years. Those sentences will run concurrently for each count. I understand that based on your medical situation and your advanced age, the consequences that you may not outlive this particular sentence. That is known only to God. There will be restitution imposed to each of the deceased victims, reserved to amount. You'll get credit for any time that you have already served. You have a right to appeal this judgment and sentence. If you wish to appeal, you must do so in writing. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. State, anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Defense, anything further at this time? Court will find Mr. Ferguson to be indigent for purposes of costs. You may file that documentation with the court file. That will conclude our sentencing.